Hey everybody, it's the Drunk Werewolf, and today we are going to be reacting to Matt Walsh trying to dump on the red pill because he is a feminist, a male feminist. So let's get into it. This all started with Pearl, and I don't even like her because I don't think women should be in the red pill, but
A lot of time in my career defending the institution of marriage. And I defend it because it's the bedrock of civilization, so it deserves defending. And I defend it because it's under constant attack, so it needs defending. And one of the most troubling developments in recent years, which we've discussed on the show in the past, is that
I go 1.5 speed, kind of like it.
these attacks are increasingly waged not just from the left, but from certain noisy segments of the right as well. Some right-wing influencers with legions of young, mostly male fans have decided that men should abandon marriage and family life and go their own way. And these influencers, many of whom consider themselves a part of the so-called red pill movement, pretend to despise feminists and yet have essentially arrived at the same conclusion as feminists, which is that we should give up on the family.
No, we don't have that conclusion. We have the conclusion that we should not be forced to be borderline slaves for women, and at one point they can just leave whenever they want and destroy everything that you've built with that woman and destroy that man's life to the point where he might commit suicide. And it's not that men hate marriage. These red pill men, like me, hate marriage. We hate the way we do it now. There's a difference. Because marriage isn't marriage anymore. Marriage is not marriage anymore. Because women have an out to marriage. Marriage used to be forever. And no-fault divorce is not marriage. I would say the more apt example is that Tradcons and feminists are basically, they're both feminists. Matt Walsh is a feminist. It's just a different flavor.
The two sides hate marriage almost as much as they hate each other. Now,
most red pill men don't hate marriage. Some of them hate marriage, but for the most part, it's just they hate the way they do it now. And the red pill is not a conservative movement whatsoever. It's not a right-wing movement. It's a non-political movement. You're doing just what the left is. The left is saying, oh, it's a right political movement. And then the right is like, oh, it's a right political movement, basically in the depths of hell.
Now, one of these influencers is a woman named Pearl Davis, who has garnered a relatively large following on YouTube and various social media platforms. She's in her mid-20s, single and childless, and yet full of opinions about modern marriage and family life, a subject that she has no personal insight into whatsoever. She spent the past few days on the internet complaining about quote-unquote tradcons like myself, who, she says, promote the nuclear family despite not understanding what it's really like. Yes.
You can't really know what family life is like until you've gone to the other side. You've never been divorced. There's lots of men who've been married for 10, 15 years and thought everything was great. And then the actual cause of why men hate marriage, divorce, happens.
We men who actually have wives and children don't know what it's like to be married, but a woman who is not married and has no children does know what it's like. In one of her tweets, she wrote, quote, "The tradcons push marriage because they aren't old enough to know better. They don't know the reality of what they're pushing." This is accompanied by a picture of myself, Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles. We aren't old enough to know better and don't know the reality of what we're pushing, yet a woman who is younger than us and single does know better and does understand this reality. In another post, she goes on to say that marriage is a terrible deal for men. And she later explains, quote, would you ever sign a contract that fails 75% of the time where your business partner is paid?
Okay, so this is my problem, is that she is saying that because I think the average age of divorce is like 40, 41. I bet you Steven Crowder, when he was advocating marriage and saying the same things about the red pill, he wouldn't be so quick to say that now, after he got destroyed by a woman who was supposedly each other's firsts. And she still did that. And yes, it is a bad deal for men.
To break the contract? Why would you encourage men to sign that contract until the terms are fixed? Now, you may be surprised to learn that marriages fail at a rate of 75%. The figure that people like this normally use is 50%. And the claim that 50% of marriages end in divorce is already spurious, and we'll have more on that in a moment, but
you're right, it's not 50%, it's higher. And if you want to take into account the fact that, yes, the number, I think it's gone down to like 40%, but that's saying that the number has gone down dramatically of numbers of marriages in total. And the fact is, you don't enter a contract that you would break, that your partner can break. That's not wise as a person. And marriage isn't good for men. What is the point of marriage? To have kids. How many kids are the average person having? I think it's like 1.5 or something like that. It's less than 2. And a lot of marriages, the woman doesn't even have the kids, and you wait until you're like, she's like 30 years old and running out of options.
75%? I was wondering where that number came from, so I scrolled down and I saw
75% comes from 50% divorce rate. There's a lot of dead bedrooms, about 1/4 of marriages. So let's add another 25% onto there. It's kind of loose math. I don't agree with it, but I can see why someone would say 75% of marriages end up in divorce.
something that she reposted from an alleged lawyer who said this, quote, it's not 50-50. That only accounts for divorces. Another 25% on the negative side for miserable men trapped in cheaper to keep her marriages, unwilling to risk financial destruction and loss of their children. 75% chance of a devastatingly bad outcome is just a bad plan. No sane person would enter into a commercial contract on such terms. Now, I did ask him where he got this 75% figure from, and he wouldn't say. Apparently, the magic statistic fairy came and whispered it in his ear. Now, for her part, Pearl later tweeted a picture of Pierce Brosnan with his wife of 20 years, and she questioned whether the marriage counts as successful since Brosnan's wife has put on some weight at the age of 60. So apparently, even if they're happy and have remained married for 2 decades, they still might fall into that 75% failure rate because they have not both remained in supermodel condition into their 60s.
No, it's the point that men and women want different things. And if you're going to say, because women, I bet if you were starting making 60K and 10 years later you made 40K or 30K and you guys were struggling to pay the bills, or you got shorter, she's not going to like that very much. She'll probably leave. Most women leave anyways. And the equivalent to that is a woman being in good shape. Because a woman gaining 50 to 100 pounds is not the same woman you married. And men can understand if you gain like 20 to 30 pounds and you have some baby weight from having a lot of kids. That's understandable. Just try to get the weight off. Just like if men gained 100 pounds, usually women care, even though they don't care as much about looks as men do. the equivalent for the men, for the woman looks, would be the men money and men height.
This debate on social media brought out the rest of the marriage skeptical crowd on the right. A bunch of these red pill influencers decided to hop on an emergency Zoom call and spend 2 hours talking about me and the rest of the Daily Wire crew and our reckless promotion of society's most fundamental institution. Now, there's one clip here that...
Yeah, the Daily Wire promotes the modern day slavery for men because they can't. They have to be borderline sycophant fans of their wives. Because most of the time, women, if they don't feel like you're being the perfect husband, or they're not happy, they will leave and take your stuff and take your kids and take everything from you. That's why he says, and people in the red pill say, that you're harming men or you're promoting something that hurts men, because let's be honest, the extreme minority of men get married and it all works out.
You should see. This is apparently a divorce lawyer who says that the failure rate for marriage is not 50% and it's not 75%. It is, in fact, even higher. Listen.
I think marriage can be successful, of course. It's just not something that's as scalable as we as a society are trying to pretend it is. Marriage is, and I've said this 100 times and I'll say it 100 more, marriage is like the lottery. You are probably not going to win. Okay? You're probably not going to win. Don't make that your 401k. You're probably not going to win. But if you win, what you win is so great that I don't blame you for buying a ticket and trying. I personally don't buy lottery tickets. But when somebody says, yeah, I played the lottery, hey man, somebody's got to win. And you know what? As long as you're not blowing money that you need for food or to put shoes on your kids' feet, you're not hurting anybody, go out, give it a try. So I always tell people, listen, marriage, when it works, when you have somebody who's married 20 plus years and they're still crazy about each other, that is the exception, not the rule. But when you do it, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. So why not buy the ticket, take the ride, but have a prenup? Wear a seatbelt, guys. You can be a safe driver, but wear a seatbelt.
So,
yeah, that's the truth. It's the extreme minority nowadays. And you can see that with all the single mothers and everything. And even then, the red pill guys, like me, are saying marriage is a wonderful thing. A lot of these red pill men leave the country and go to another country and try to find a woman to marry over there and stay over there because they like marriage. They just don't like the way that it is done in America.
a happy marriage, he says, is like winning a lottery. And the thing about the lottery...
Yes. It is like a lottery ticket in America. It is... You're probably not going to win, but if you do, you're winning something more precious than anything. But it's also exceedingly rare to find a woman that will stay with you your whole life. And it doesn't count if you stay for 15 years or 20 years and then she divorces you.
Is that almost everybody loses. This is a perfect summation of how this entire club views marriage and the message that they're sending to young men in particular. Sure, it can be great, they concede, but only if you're insanely lucky. Everybody else is screwed. This is a rather bleak view of marriage, and thankfully, it's also nonsense.
I want to know how it's nonsense. Let's see how he debunks this, because the data does not support Matt Walsh's argument. And that's putting it lightly.
First of all, the claim that marriage isn't scalable is obviously ridiculous because marriage has served as the bedrock of human society since time immemorial. It has already happened at the scale of civilization for thousands of years. Now, the divorce lawyers come along and say that, this thing that society's been doing forever?
It's the way we do it now, Matt. The way we do it now. It's not marriage throughout time. He wasn't saying marriage all throughout time is not a wonderful thing. He's talking about right now. There is a difference. This is such an emotional argument.
Turns out it doesn't work. Unless you're the 1 in a million. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous claim. Now, what about the failure rate of marriages in our culture? We've heard 50%, we've heard 75%. We just heard that they fail at a rate similar to the rate that people lose the lottery, which would mean higher than 99%, a lot higher. Yet, these kinds of astronomical odds are not based in anything but the doom and gloom speculations of the people inventing them. There is no evidence that having a happy marriage is as unlikely as winning the lottery, or that 75% of marriages end in misery.
It's not about the happy marriage. It's about, is your marriage miserable? And did it last a lifetime? Because that's a successful marriage. A successful marriage is point blank. You guys get married and you stay together your whole life. And you are relatively happy, not miserable, live in separate bedrooms, don't want to sleep with each other anymore, against the man's will, that kind of thing. Happy marriage.
And what about the 50% number? Well, this is at least is a familiar statistic. It's something that you've probably heard before. 50% of marriages end in divorce. It's familiar, but it is bogus.
That's funny, because basically all the statistics in recent memory have been 50% divorce rate. And the only reason the number has gone down, you saw it for a little bit at 40%, now it's going back up to 50%. I think last year's statistics it said 50%. And that's because less people are getting married. And the number of people going married is going to go down. So obviously, the amount of divorces is going to go down with it. But even when you calculate it with the amount of... the number is still like 50%, even with the numbers of marriages going way down.
And one way you know that it's bogus is that people have been claiming that 50% of marriages end in divorce since I was a kid.
Yeah, because for the last 30 plus years, because of feminism, the divorce rate has been 50%. And most people are divorced or married twice or a bunch of single mothers. So yeah, the culture shows it. Just because it's been happening since you were a kid, Matt, does not mean that it's not true. The sky has been blue and the sun has been yellow since you were a kid. And just because people are saying that now doesn't mean that it is not true about back then and now.
I've been hearing that my whole life. And that would mean that divorce rates are static across time. But of course, that isn't the case. In fact, we know that divorce rates have gone down in recent years.
No, the divorce rates, the number has stayed between 40 to 50%, sometimes going a little bit over 50%. The number of marriages has gone down. The rate has stayed about the same, but the number of people getting married has plummeted, especially in the last 20 to 30 years.
So where does the 50% figure come from? Apparently it's a holdover from the 1980s, which is when people first started citing that statistic. It's not true today.
No, you look at the statistics, there are Pew Research statistics and other statistics about the marriage and divorce rate. That's what it's called. It's called statistics, Matt. Because you see, you have a certain number of people married and a certain number of people get divorced. And they keep those statistics. That's how those numbers come to be. I can't tell if he's just trolling or not.
And it's actually not clear that it was true even in the 80s either. So what is the actual divorce rate? It's a little bit hard to determine. Probably our best guess is based on U.S. Census data, which according to the most recent figures, says that about 35% of American adults who have been married have been divorced. So it's not exactly going to give us a precisely scientific figure of what the divorce rate is, but it's as close as we're going to get, 35%. And 35% is high. I mean, it's way too high.
So I want to know, how did he get to that number, 35%? Even if you say 35%, and if every time you get married you have a 35% number, Undead Chronic has done numbers on this, The Better Bachelor and other Red Pill guys have done numbers on... There's such a lot of research about women with certain body counts having percentage likelihood of getting divorced when they get married, depending on how many premarital partners, and there's been ones who... There is studies and census data and all that proves that at the lowest it's like 40%, and at the highest it could be anywhere from 60 to 70. A pretty good middle is about 50%. And the statistics usually show 50%.
It's not 50%, though. And it's not 75%. And it's not...
Wait, Matt. I'm not going to let you do that. Just like you don't let liberals try to sneak stuff past. You said it's not very clear, so you don't know. And you're just guessing, but you want to take out statistics that the red pill men are showing you of studies and of census data and Pew Research and stuff like that.
99%. And it's definitely not lottery odds. Still, isn't it terrifying to think that if you get married, your chance of failure is 35% and the chance of success is only 65% at the most? You know, even if we go with that number, isn't that still very, very scary? Isn't it high enough that it should dissuade anyone from attempting it? The answer to that question is no. And here's
Let's
why.
hear 'em. Oh.
If the divorce rate is 35%, or even if it's
Speed 'em
50%,
up.
it does not follow that your own particular marriage has a 35 or 50% chance of failure. Now, I'm not saying that you should be cocky or reckless or that you should see yourself as invincible. I am saying that you shouldn't, on the other extreme, see yourself as passive debris floating helplessly on the tide of statistical likelihoods. Because you are an individual. Your marriage is an individual thing. And its chances of failure are not set by society at large. So here's an example to illustrate what I mean.
No, okay, let's hear him, and then I'll just dismantle this whole thing.
And this is really, really important to understand because as marriage rates fall, and those are falling, the thing that convinces so many people to not marry in the first place are numbers like this. And this misconception that, well, look at the divorce rate, and that is my own specific chance of getting divorced. And I'm here to tell you that's not how it works. Well, you know a company's looking out for you when they actually upgrade.
I do not want this ad. Okay, well...
Truly value you. That's puretalk.com/Walsh. Pure Talk, wireless for Americans, by Americans. So here's...
Okay, so we're going to break this down before he tries to come up with a stupid example. The example, honestly, is that every man and woman, every man that got divorced, looked at that woman with the 80% divorce rate, women divorce 80% of the time, that she would not do it. They both thought that they would stay together forever, or at least that's what he thought that she thought. And that doesn't change the fact that people don't go into marriage not thinking it will succeed, but yet they still divorced, and the divorce rate was still 50%. It's almost like feelings change over time, and you shouldn't get into laws that can crush you with an iron fist. And it's almost like men should be saying that once you fix the marriage laws and get rid of no-fault divorce and all that, then we will come back to the table. Wait. Doesn't the red pill say that? Go places where you won't get destroyed, and you can find a wife who will be the traditional wife. Wow. These red pill guys must know what they're talking about.
I think this illustrates it. The obesity rate in the United States is over 40%. Does that mean that your own chances of becoming obese are 40%? No, it doesn't. Your chances might be 5%. They might be practically zero, or they might be quite a bit higher than 40%. That's because obesity is the result of behavior and choices. If you do not engage in the behavior or make the choices that lead to obesity, you will not become obese.
Whose choices, Matt? Whose choices on whether you become obese or not? That's why this comparison doesn't work. Whose choices? Oh, you choose if you're going to be obese. I choose if I'm going to be obese. The person down the street chooses if they're going to be obese. Your wife chooses if she wants to be obese. You don't choose if she's going to be obese or not. Because she is a whole other human being with thoughts and everything else. That's where this comparison falls flat in its face.
The fact that 40% of people around you are fat does not mean that you automatically have a 40% obesity risk. Now let's take another example. Car accidents. Americans get into car accidents at a certain rate. I'm not sure what the rate is. It doesn't matter for our purposes. What does matter is that your own individual chance of getting into a car accident is not the same as every other driver on the road. The people who compile statistics will say things like, motorists have an X% chance of getting into a collision. But you are not just a generic motorist. You are an individual. Now, you can never bring your own chance of dying in a fiery car wreck down to zero. But if you're a responsible driver, then obviously your chances of getting into an accident are much lower than the chances of someone who is not responsible. All of those stupid drivers who don't understand the basic rules of the road and like to tweet and eat while they drive and everything else, they're inflating the numbers for everyone. They're also making the roads more dangerous for everyone. They are actually actively...
Isn't it true that you can do everything right as a driver and you can still get hit because of one stupid driver? Or they can be driving crazy one day and accidentally hit somebody? That's kind of how marriage is. Car driving is not a good example because mostly if you can avoid wrecks by choosing yourself, you are in control of how you drive, and most of the time you can avoid these high-risk people. Sometimes you can't. On second thought, it's a lot like marriage. You can do everything right, and then there can just be this bad, crazy driver one day, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're dead. Or you're in the hospital or something.
Making your own chances of getting into a car accident higher because the roads are filled with stupid people. But your chances are not as high as their chances. You do not share their level of risk unless you're as dumb as they are. Because again, you are an individual, not a mere statistic. So, what about marriage? It's true that even if you do everything right, things can still fall apart if your spouse doesn't follow that program. Now, if you both do everything right, or even most things right, then your chance of divorce is basically zero. But you do everything on your end, and maybe your spouse doesn't do the same, and then it falls apart anyway, and that happens, and it's terrible, but it happens.
Yeah, and that's most of the time what happens. There are so many stories that you can look out of red pill. I mean, I haven't gone over any like regular stories like on Reddit and stuff, but there's all the time. Oh, this guy's so perfect. He does everything right. He just doesn't give me the tingles. So I went with my ex-boyfriend and cheated on him. And now the guy's leaving me. Or I left my boyfriend for the ex or this hot guy at the gym. And now I'm lonely and sad and a single mother because I left my husband. And all this kind of stuff. It happens all the time. Because imagine that when you give emotional people, women, love women, but they're very emotional and they make choices on their emotions. So if you make choices on your emotions, you are susceptible to doing things that are not in the best interest of you. It's like women base, if they want to stay in a relationship, on if they're happy. You can't always be happy.
It's also true that there are many, many things you can do in your marriage and before your marriage to make it much more secure than the average. Obvious things. Like you can marry someone who shares your same fundamental values. Not everyone does that. In fact, a lot of people don't. A lot of people go into marriages knowing ahead of time that they're marrying someone who doesn't share their fundamental values. Their chances of divorce are going to be somewhere much higher than yours if you don't make that basic entry-level mistake that they have made.
Most men don't do that. Most men think they have shared values, and then the woman gets the ring and they switch up. After a couple of years, maybe they have one kid, and they don't do everything that they're supposed to do. And then they're trapped. Because women know as much as men that they're, and most of them look up the laws. They have a certain amount of time where they're eligible for alimony, usually 10 years. Or they'll wait until they have a couple of kids. Then they'll start not doing things. And all of a sudden they're 150 pounds overweight from what they used to be. Or 100 pounds. And they're not sleeping with you. It's a dead bedroom. And they get the security of getting everything paid for. And if you don't want to deal with it anymore, that she doesn't want to sleep with you, you just leave. And then you have to pay for everything. Women know about these laws and they take advantage of them all the time. That's why men are trying to get them. MRAs, no matter what you feel about them, been trying to get rid of these man-hating laws for forever. You don't get in a business deal with someone who is incentivized to break it. I bet Steven Crowder didn't think when he had shared values with his wife, both traditional, both virgins by his account, and there was still a divorce. There are countless things of that because FOMO is a real thing. And Matt Walsh is just living in the past. Tradcons, just continue to try to hate on the red pill. I dare ya. Keep doing it. It's just going to hurt you in the long run. And obviously he has to say all this stuff because that's his entire brand. Even if he agreed with them. But I'm done ragging on Matt Walsh because it's just like all these other feminists. He's just a traditional feminist. And he doesn't even know it, or he lies about not being one, thinking he's not one. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.